Lecture. My name is Vincent Howell, and I serve as the director of the Doctor of Ministry program at Hood. Won't you join me in a word of prayer as we prepare to begin? God of grace and God of glory, we come to you this day knowing that this is indeed a gift. You have truly blessed us to live and to be in this space together. We ask thy blessings on our seminary, this lecture series, our lecturer, and all who have gathered. We will serve you, Lord, with certainty that one day we will see you face to face, a day when all things will become clear and life's challenges will be made whole through the grace of Christ. Blessed be you, O Lord my God. Blessed be the day you have given us. Amen. Again, this lecture series was established in 1999, originally called the Heritage Lectureship Series. It was established under the leadership of former Hood Theological Seminary president, the late Dr. Albert Amer. In 2012, the seminary renamed the lecture series the Alfred E. and Mamie White Heritage Lecture Series. I'm blessed to have met Bishop White during the early years of my ministry. Bishop Alfred E. White was recognized as a compassionate and innovative pastor, building character and churches. His tenure as pastor culminated at the Metropolitan AME Zion Church in Hartford, Connecticut, where he served for 22 years and gained notable recognition as a powerful preacher and spiritual leader. As a pastor, preacher, commission, and Episcopal leader, Bishop White's denominational involvement spanned years of dedicated service to the AME Zion Church. His ability to motivate and his sensitive and caring leadership capacity as a presiding elder in the Hartford district earned Bishop White the reputation of being a pastor's pastor. As a down-to-earth leader, he also had a great love for music and was an accomplished violinist who played with the Hartford Civic Orchestra and often accompanied the chancel choir at Metropolitan Church. In August 1984, the denomination's General Conference elected him the 80th bishop in succession of the AME Zion Church. Mrs. Mamie Williams White, who was brought up in Charlotte and at times lived in Salisbury, was for over 22 years the First Lady of the Metropolitan AME Zion Church. And her passion for youth and led her to become a founder of the Christian Youth Fellowship Program, where she used her background in education to nurture youth in the church and in the community. Her most influential work in the church was during the time she served as missionary supervisor, while her husband served many churches as a bishop. She and Bishop White traveled domestically and internationally, helping congregations throughout the world spread the gospel and congregations to thrive. Mrs. White was a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and the prestigious Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. So yes, this is a special lecture series in the life of the Hood Theological Seminary. And with this in mind, I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Reverend Gwendolyn Moore, the benefactor who established the endowment that funds the Bishop Alfred E. and Mamie White Heritage Lectures Series. Thank you. For 2024, for the lecture today, again, we welcome the Reverend Dr. Vanessa Lovelace, Associate Dean and Associate Professor of Hebrew Bible Old Testament at Lancaster Theological Seminary in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. Her academic preparation includes earning the BA from San Francisco State University, Master of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary, and her PhD from the Chicago Theological Seminary. Dr. Lovelace is an experienced Hebrew Bible Old Testament scholar. She's taught introductory Hebrew Bible Old Testament, biblical exegesis, and elementary biblical Hebrew courses, as well as womanist biblical interpretation of the Bible, race, gender, sexuality, and pastoral care. Her areas of expertise include Hebrew Bible, uh, prophets and prophecy, women and gender in ancient Israel. Her teaching and research interests include interpreting Bible or biblical texts using critical literary criticism and theory of gender and nation through a womanist lens. Her co-edited volume, Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, Expanding the Discourse, contains essays that bring a womanist analysis and thought to the interpretation of biblical texts to reveal the inherently simultaneously interlocking dynamics of race, gender, sexuality, and class to the text and contemporary Black women's lives. This work also addresses current issues such as the Black Lives Matter movement, domestic violence, human trafficking, and hip hop culture. Her current research project is a monograph titled Outsider Within, a womanist reading the Hebrew Bible narratives as the politics of belonging. And it analyzes certain biblical Israel narratives for how they were used by both the writer and later U.S. readers of the text to include some and exclude others from group members. Her guild service includes co-chairing the Women in the Biblical World unit of the Society of Biblical Literature and serving on the American Academy of Religion Committee on the status of women in the profession. Reverend Carol E. Lynch, PhD, former president at Lancaster Seminary, describes this outstanding theologian, saying Dr. Lovelace also has the significant institutional service required as an effective leader in higher education. We are delighted to welcome this passionate educator, respected scholar, and skilled administrator to the Hood Theological Seminary today for this lecture series. So on behalf of the Hood Theological Seminary family, Dr. Lovelace, we welcome you today.
Thank you, Dr. Howell, for that very generous introduction. I bring you greetings on behalf of Lancaster Theological Seminary and Moravian Seminary, which are embedded within the Moravian University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I would also once more like to extend my thanks to the Academic Dean, Dr. Trevor Eppiheimer, Dean of Students, Dr. Dora Mboyesongo, and the Biblical Studies Department faculty for the invitation to deliver the 2024 Bishop Alfred E. and Mrs. Mamie White Endowed Heritage Lecture Series. I would also like to thank those of you in attendance this morning. It is my honor once again to have been chosen to deliver the lecture series established by Lancaster Theological Seminary alumnus and former Hood Theological Seminary president, Dr. Albert Aymer, and the father of my dear friend and mentor, Margaret Aymer, may he rest in peace, and renamed for a giant in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and his wife, who I just learned this morning is also my soror. My lecture this morning is titled, We Don't Give Birth to Thugs, Family Values, Respectability Politics, and Jephthah's Mother in Judges 11:1 through chapter 12, verse 7. Based on my article in my co-edited volume mentioned by Dr. Howell with Dr. Gay L. Byron, Womanist Interpretations of the Bible, Expanding the Discourse. So again, how did I get here? Last night, I began with the question, how did I get here? How did I reach the point in my recent scholarship that the subject of mothers and motherhood in the Hebrew Bible text and contemporary U.S. context would be so much of my area of focus, beginning with Sarah and Hagar? I confessed last night that I had been surprised by the turn my research took, because growing up, I had never been interested in maternal matters. I had not planned on being a mother. Yet years later, I met and married a man with 2 children. Shortly thereafter, I gave birth to our son. Although I am fiercely protective of my children, I still don't consider myself maternal. I side with researchers who argue that maternal instinct is a myth that men created to deny women entry in the workforce, affordable childcare, and fair compensation. One researcher noted that maternal instinct, quote, is rooted in religious notions of mothers as selfless and committed entirely to the role. Think of the Virgin Mary, the most, quote, virtue-laden symbol of motherhood there is, end quote. Even my dissertation was on Deborah and Huldah, 2 childless women prophets. As I already mentioned, my journey down the maternal matters path began with Sarah and Hagar. Although I had written an exegesis paper on Hagar and Sarah using an intersectional lens of race, gender, sexuality, and power, my first foray into motherhood as a subject of research in the Hebrew Bible began with a lecture that I gave for a job interview and the subsequent invitation to publish the lecture as an article in the school's journal where I taught for 7 years, titled, "This Woman's Son Shall Not Inherit with My Son," towards a womanist politics of belonging in the Sarah-Hagar narratives. The story of Sarah and Hagar in Genesis 16 and 21 was a biblical narrative that was well suited for demonstrating my methodological approaches of feminist theory of gender and nation and womanist hermeneutics to examine motherhood and power dynamics in national projects and processes. I contend in this article, which I have since revised and expanded as a chapter in my forthcoming book. Again, Dr. Howe, I have to make a change. My editor or the publishers have changed the title somewhat, and it is now A Womanist Readings of the Hebrew Bible as the Politics of Belonging as an Outsider Within. And so in this revised and expanded article, revision to that article, I contend that Sarah, despite her limitations as a woman in a patriarchal society, uses the political project of motherhood to expel Hagar and Ishmael as insiders in Abraham's household and secure her place as an insider, as the mother in Israel, and Isaac's as the heir to the promise. 3 of the 5 chapters in my manuscript focus on mothers, motherhood, and the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, class, and citizenship. My topic of discussion this morning is about Jephthah's mother. Many traditional commentaries focus on Jephthah, from how Jephthah's triumph turned to tragedy, the irrevocability of the vow once God gave Jephthah the victory over the Ammonites, the futility of the vow since it is offered as an inducement, an illegal bribe, and how his fulfillment of the vow meant the end of his family line since his daughter was both his only child and a virgin when she died. Feminist and womanist scholars in the 80s and 90s wrote about Jephthah's faithfulness to an unfaithful vow, in contrast to his daughter's faithful response. The ambiguity whether Jephthah's daughter was sacrificed or consigned to perpetual virginity, the friends of Jephthah's daughter who accompanied her to bewail her virginity, and the comparison between Jephthah's daughter and contemporary Black women who sometimes barter their own lives to preserve the honor of the Black men in their lives. To my knowledge, my article is the only one that focuses on Jephthah's mother. I treat the story of Jephthah's mother from a functionalist sociological perspective and womanist hermeneutic. This perspective emphasizes the significance of the family as an institution for preserving social stability by socializing children, providing a major source for emotional and practical support for its members, policing sexual activity and sexual reproduction, and providing its members with a social identity. The functionalist perspective promotes the conventional family structure with the male breadwinner, stay-at-home mom, nuclear family as the ideal one for securing the family's economic stability and children's needs. Functionalists maintain that significant deviation from this family structure will create social instability. For example, mothers who work outside the home, especially single mothers, are considered a threat to the survival of the family as an institution because they are viewed as ineffective in the socialization of their children, leading to their children's juvenile delinquency. Think back to the maternal instinct myth. I argue that many interpreters, unintentionally or not, have racialized Jephthah's mother and her son as Black through the lens of the functionalist perspective of the family values, and the politics of respectability. And I'm going to here read just a brief part of my article and then show you a video. I'm reading from starting from page 245. An example of how race and gender play a role in the functionalist perspective is the mention of the Moynihan report on the Black family. The report concluded that Black families had rejected the majority, parentheses, white, male-dominated family structure, which resulted in a, quote, tangle of pathology, end quote, from which it would be difficult for Black families to recover. In attributing the cause of the challenges facing Black America to the usurpation by Black women of male authority in the home, Moynihan stated, quote, in essence, the Negro community has been forced into a matriarchal structure, which, because it is so out of line with the rest of American society, seriously retards the progress of the group as a whole and imposes a crushing blow on the Negro male and, in consequence, on a great many Negro women as well. The functional perspective is sustained by a family value rhetoric, which shares perspectives on the role of the traditional family in sustaining the nation. When public policy issues on the cause of poverty and their solutions are debated, family values or Judeo-Christian values are often included regarding what reforms should be added or excluded. Although both liberals and conservatives bandy about the phrase, religious and political conservatives usually invoke it to decry the lack of Christian ideas, practices, effectively subsuming the Judeo in the phrase under the Christian. As the rhetoric goes, the lack of Judeo-Christian values is manifested by the growing societal ills, including a rise in crime, high school dropout rate, poverty, and health disparities. Family values rhetoric was elevated in the American political lexicon when former Vice President Dan Quayle, in a May 1992 speech at the Commonwealth Club of California, commonly referred to as the Murphy Brown speech, pronounced that the Los Angeles riots that ensued following the acquittal of the police officers who beat Black motorist Rodney King were the result of a quote unquote poverty of values in the Black community rather than a response to systemic racism and inequality in the United States.
Disintegrating family values.
It doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice.
Maybe you overreacted just a hair.
Sure, Alvin, I overreacted. I'm telling you, we get her back in here, we open her purse, I guarantee you we find a big baggie filled with eye of newt. 10 minutes till the next man comes. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go upstairs and take a shower. And no one, not even Norman Bates, is my brother.
So that was, again, former Vice President Dan Quayle remarking about Murphy Brown, which is a fictional character in a television show, being her having a child sans a marital partner would lead to all sorts of ills in our society. Yes, I gotta pick up my place. Here we go. So I argue yeah, if I repeat myself, I apologize. So I argue that many interpreters, unintentionally or not, have racialized Jephthah's mother and her son as Black through the lens of the functionalist perspective of the family. Thus, the mother is to blame when he becomes a renegade or meets with a tragic ending or both. Jephthah's fate is the expected outcome of his birth to a prostitute. The negative evaluations of Jephthah on account of his mother's status are much like the rhetoric around Black male children born to single mothers. Jephthah is assigned epithets such as terrorist, outlaw, and thug, all labels that apply to a criminal element who preys on members of his or her own community. Thus, Jephthah, in being represented as lacking traditional family values, along with his mother, is racialized Black. Let us now turn our attention to Judges 11:1, 12 through 7. Now Jephthah the Gileadite, the son of a prostitute, was a mighty warrior. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away, saying to him, "You shall not inherit anything in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Outlaws gathered around Jephthah and went raiding with him. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander, so that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Are you not the very ones who rejected me and drove me out of my father's house? So why do you come to me now when you are in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "Nevertheless, we have now turned back to you, so that you may go with us and fight with the Ammonites and become head over us, over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight with the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be witness between us. We will surely do as you say." So Jephthah went to the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So, although Jephthah's mother is only an agent in helping to establish the character development of Jephthah, she is nonetheless ever present in the story's background. All we know about her is that she is a woman, a mother, and a Zonah, the Hebrew term used usually translated into English as prostitute, harlot, and whore. Thus, the noun Zonah can mean an occasional or professional sex worker. It can mean an occasional or professional sex worker. However, it can also mean a woman who is engaged in sexual relations with a man not her husband, or any socially prescribed or promiscuous behavior by women that should bring shame upon her or her family. It is what I consider slut shaming, publicly scolding girls or women for engaging in behavior, or just the accusation of said behavior, considered promiscuous or sexually provocative, so as to put her back in her place. It is what womanists might say to a young girl who is displaying sexually uninhibited behavior like switching or swishing her hips from side to side when she walks. You actin' womanish. It is a term at the root of Alice Walker's definition of womanist, a term popularized by poet, author, and activist Alice Walker in her widely acclaimed publication In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose in 1983. Although it is sometimes said approvingly, more often than not, it is meant to shame the young girl into changing her behavior. Another detail provided about the unnamed woman in Judges 11 is that she is not married to Jephthah's father. In fact, the Masoretic text is ambiguous whether Jephthah's father is even identified. Some translations identify his name as Gilead. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, the New Revised Standard Version and the English Standard Version. And Gilead begat Jephthah, King James Version. But Gilead was his father, the Message. Yet the Masoretic text has Gilead fathered Jephthah. As such, without the standard patronymic son of Gilead, as in Jephthah, son of Gilead, Gilead could be a personal name, but it could also mean the place where he is from. If the former, then the reader is informed of Jephthah's father's identity. If the latter, then the reader is left to surmise that given the intimation of his mother's sexual impropriety, any man of Gilead could be the father. Thus, in contrast to legitimate Hebrew wives who are barren but by divine intervention conceive and give birth to sons who save the nation, this unnamed, unmarried, fruitful Hebrew woman gave birth to a son who, although when given the opportunity, saved the nation, nonetheless saw his future aborted in the classic tragic hero motif. The life and death of American rapper and folk hero Tupac Shakur, who was killed in 1996, comes to mind for me. The first verse in Judges 11 gives three brief characteristics of Jephthah. He was a Gileadite, a brave fighter, and the son of a prostitute. Jephthah was likely the firstborn of his father's sons. Jephthah's name means may God open or God opens, a praise offered up at the birth of a firstborn. Primogeniture was a common practice in the ancient world, and Jephthah, as the firstborn, should have been the patrilineal successor to his father's inheritance. However, when Jephthah's brothers from another mother grew up, they drove Jephthah out of town to keep Jephthah from inheriting in their father's house. Again, you might recall from last night, the theme of inheritance was also in the Sarah and Hagar narrative. Jephthah fled from his brothers to the land of Tob, where he drew quote unquote outlaws, literally worthless or empty men in Hebrew, to himself, and they went out with him. Here is where Jephthah earned his title as a mighty warrior and the epithet thug. Commentators have referred to Jephthah and the men gathered around him as guerrilla fighters, mercenaries, and military ruffians. Each of these titles infers a group of men resorting to crime or other disreputable means to earn a living, men who were forced to operate, quote, outside the institutional power base, end quote. Jephthah's situation is similar to many young Black men who, excluded from social attainment due to lagging educational and skill achievement, incarceration, and limited access to the labor force, resort to the underground economy as a source of income. Yet, critics are quick to blame single mothers for raising children whom they argue become an economic burden on society, fail to acknowledge that these young men, like Jephthah, who were stripped of their economic and social stability, nevertheless inculcate a strong work ethic and individual responsibility, virtues promoted by the family values proponents. Moreover, like Jephthah, many of them are also respected for their ability to navigate the dangers in their communities. Jephthah's critics are not willing to concede that he played their game, that if one works hard enough, they will get ahead. Values perhaps passed down by his mother and one. Jephthah was a tragic figure whose missteps were costly for his family. However, he was not fated for doom because he was the son of an unmarried woman who failed to pass down traditional family values to him. Despite efforts, inadvertent or not, to racialize Jephthah and his mother as Black, Jephthah is a sympathetic character who is blamed for not conforming to societal norms, rather than placing the responsibility for Jephthah's challenges on society or culture, from his brothers who disinherited him and exiled him to the elders who co-signed their actions, instead of placing the blame on his mother. In conclusion, this has been my effort to interpret an ancient text through the prisms of a contemporary context using an intersectional framework of race, gender, sexuality, and power. I have shown that Jephthah's mother's status does not determine his life circumstances, nor those of sons of Black mothers. We don't give birth to sons, we give birth to children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lovelace. Thank you so much for sharing with us this day. I have put in the chat if anyone has a question. We do have a few minutes to raise questions. Put your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute, that's fine too. But I do see one question that we'll start with. This question says, if his father is not known, who are his brothers who identify with him as from another woman? How is that reflected in the politics or identity today? Shall I read that again?
No, I read it in the chat. So
Okay.
I'm glad to see that Dr. Mboya is on the lecture this morning, the Zoom meeting this morning. Greetings again to you. So to the questions I raised, whether or not his father is named Gilead, and therefore Jephthah is the son of Gilead, or if it is just a man of Gilead and that he's from Gilead, one would help to determine whether or not his brothers who identify him from another woman. So I would argue on the side that his father is Gilead, even though the patronymic, the personal name, is not attached to it in the standard formula, that they certainly recognize that they share the same father. And one, because I argue in the article that even though Jephthah's mother is unknown, that he was raised in his father's household. And so they would be familiar with him or know that he is their brother because he grew up in his father's household. And so in terms of the politics of identity, it's not quite the same. I'll give an example. I remember growing up and the church I attended, my childhood church, the pastor had a child from a woman who was not his wife. And it was known that that child was his, even though she did not live with his family. And whether or not he acknowledged her publicly or in terms of paying child support or giving her his name, I don't know. I was too young to remember those details. But I think it's similar to that, except that it would be more the case if the mother of the child, who was not the wife, had given the child to be raised by the husband and wife, by the pastor and his wife. And so I look at Jephthah as having been given to the father to be raised in his household. and therefore he was due the inheritance of a firstborn when his father died. Did I answer the question?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are there other questions?
I have
Again,
I have a
please.
comment question. Due to society right now, whether it's white or Latino or Black or whatever, we do have a large amount of women in each of those societies that are raising children on their own, whether it's a divorce, whether they've never been married and had children out of wedlock, or whether there was death of the husband. How does this ideal of the idyllic family result in good children? I remember Romney, when he was running for president, he made the comment that we need to stop having these babies out of wedlock and be married and have children and raise them right, whatever right means in his mind. But how does that guarantee that because you're married and have a husband and a wife in a home, that the children won't come out as expected to come out? Because we see this in our newsroom, we see from the rich to the poor that everyone has problems with their children. The difference with the rich is they can buy them out of situations where the poor cannot. The difference is highlighted with the Blacks, with the minorities, but it's not highlighted with the white. So how does that guarantee when something is out of my control, my husband dies, and I'm the single parent, and I choose not to bring another man over my children, how does that impact me with society saying, I'm going to raise my children to be hoodlums?
There's a lot in there. I'm going to try and respond. So to your first question, I think you have hit the nail on the head that traditional families, while there is a recent argument for raising children within two-parent marriages, that for economic reasons, economic stability, but that the traditional families doesn't always mean functional, even though the approach that I use is called the functionalist approach. We know that there is incest in families. We know that there is brokenness in families. Exhibit A would be Sarah Palin, the former another vice president with issues, her daughter, and not to blame her daughter, but nonetheless gave birth to a child outside of marriage. And I don't think that that she was condemned or that they blamed her parents and said that her condition was because her parents did not hold traditional family values. And to your other point, yes, that it could be death, it could be divorce, it could be or not having been married at all. Nonetheless, the way our public policy is structured tends to penalize women who are raising children without a spouse. And so another example from the other side is that Barack Obama was raised by a single mother for most of his life. And so because of divorce, as you mentioned, and I'm not sure if she divorced or if her second husband died, but nonetheless, so she raised him for a large part, he and his sister, as a single mother. And she is, there are those who have said that Barack Obama is a thug because he was raised by a single mother. So you are going to have that. But it's up to us as voters to be engaged when those policies and become aware when those policies that come up in the legislature that we get out and force and vote against them and vote against those who, the elected officials who are enacting them.
Dr. Lovelace, just to piggyback off of those comments, I always like to ask the question, and you've somewhat touched on it in this particular answer. What should the local Black church be doing then? Or what should the church do to take action?
I think Sister McGee or somebody asked me that last night. Being engaged, one. So I'm going to get in trouble here, but I'm going to say it. I think traditionally the Black church, in order to help combat this, needs to finally let go of respectability politics. That has really kept us, because the roots of respectability politics, even though it had a good intent for with the uplift of the Black family and helping to provide, especially those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, with the education and the resources to lift themselves up, is how they might put it, or help them lift as we climb, was their motto. It's still turned on mostly women, Black women, carrying the burden of being respectable in order to be accepted by whites. The thought was, if we could prove we could be just as virtuous and just as hardworking and upright as white people, then they'll accept us and treat us as equal citizens. Well, not only has that not ever happened, as you see, we're going backwards with the reversal of anything teaching about Black history in the schools, in the government, that our history and our heritage, our culture has not been accepted. But that it's, again, that Black women have largely carried the burden. And so I think letting go of respectability politics, being engaged in those laws, those policies that are detrimental to us. Again, I mentioned last night with Black women's maternity being criminalized, for if a Black woman has a miscarriage, or especially if she was doing drugs or alcohol during her pregnancy. Studies have shown that there is not a link between the two, but nonetheless, they have used that to arrest women and charge them with the murder or the deaths of their children. And so the whole criminalization of motherhood, of Black motherhood in particular, is something that I don't know if it's been on the Black church's radar, but I do believe that the Black women's maternal mortality and Black infant and mortality has really picked up awareness and action in the Black church. And I think such moves as that will be helpful.
Thank you. Here's another question in the chat. It says, I'm curious as to your thoughts about the recent conviction of the Michigan mother of a teenage school shooter. The court determined, let's see where it's at, determined that she was significantly responsible for the destructive activity of her son. Was this judgment against her fair, a product of patriarchal society?
I would hold judgment until, because the father is also going to be tried. That originally, when they brought charges against the parents decided that in their own interests that they would separate and be tried separately, or that they would, that was redundant, but nonetheless, they would be tried separately for their own interests. So I guess the mother's trial went first. So I think it will depend on if the father is also found guilty before I would say that it is an attack against mothers, and they're holding mothers responsible for their children's actions.
All right, thank you. And here's the next question that's in our chat. Should the issue be what values are important to the well-being of humans and how those values are passed on to the younger generation? What and where are men, fathers, and women, mothers, their responsibility in rearing children today?
So I think parental responsibility. One, when I again talked about the maternal instinct myth, that places the burden on, it's not just a burden, it claims that women are just innately meant to raise and take care, be selfless and nurture children, when there are not only men who are just as capable of having I'll say, a paternal instinct for loving and raising and nurturing children into adulthood. But even biologically, there is not shown that motherhood or maternal instincts is gendered to just a female animal. And so what you do is you don't recognize how hard being a parent is, especially just as a mother in general, because of giving birth. It's probably why I only had one child. But the exhaustion, especially as a first-time parent, of really not knowing what to do, for some who have postpartum depression, just trying to figure that out with books and advice. And it is not innate. It is hard work. I certainly loved being the mother to my son and raising him with my husband. But mothering or parenting is hard. And so to put that burden on just one parent instead of on both parents, I think we should recognize that it's not, that good parenting should not be gendered, and that it should be shared. But yes, I also think parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, those aunties and uncles it takes a village. I do believe in that motto for raising and inculcating those values that we might deem important for the health and wholeness of our children and the safety of our children.
Thank you. Let's see what else is in the chat. The next question in the chat: where are parenting skills taught today?
So that implies that parenting isn't going on. I think there are some really good parents out there. Do they need help? Do some parents need help? I think all parents. Again, I think it takes a village. I don't think it should be done just by one parent or two. That was the other thing I've said to people. If I had to do it again, I would never have had my son so far away from my extended family. I was living in Chicago, and all my family's in California. And so it was very difficult not having my parents and cousins and others around to help raise my son. And so I really appreciated those summers when I took him to spend with my family in California. And so I think that, again, when we look at policies, that they have really impeded the efforts for people to co-parent or to help having that extended family and friends there to help parents raise children.
Great. Are there other questions? Again, feel free to unmute and raise your question or put it in the chat.
I have a comment. I remember the show Leave It to Beaver. You know, the husband goes off to work and mom stays home with the kid and raises the kid. But my issue with two-parent homes doesn't mean that a single woman cannot raise their child to do the right thing, even when a husband is not there, or even when a husband is there. We have a society where men work, women work, and when a woman comes home, she has to put on several hats: teacher hat, the nurse hat, every hat that's there is that woman's job. While the man comes home from work, tired, sits in a chair, wait for mama to cook, wait for mama to do the homework with the kids, and goes to bed. He's there, but is he present? And that's my issue with this two-family household that has been legalized to say that if you're not a two-family household, then you're not going to have functional children. My mother raised 6 kids. All 6 of us are graduates. My mother left my father because we were starving in Detroit. She brought us home to an extended family. And they saw that we had values, kept us accountable, supported my mother. And my mother has 6 college graduates, washing dishes and cooking at a restaurant. And that's the story of my hometown. That's not just my mother. That's the story of my hometown. Well, the people in the village, the parents of the village got together, and the teachers told us we had to do something with our lives, because doing something with our lives would help the people. 85% of my classmates graduated from college, and most of them came from single parents that worked in restaurants and did menial jobs like my mother. But the greatest thing she did was she developed her children doing those menial jobs. So I pray that I've been in a marriage for 51 years. I thank God for it. I pray that we do come together as men and women and raise our children together, corporately together. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the women that are doing those should be downcasted of raising children that will not be anything.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend McGee. Other thoughts or comments? I'll ask one other question. Here's one. Dr. Lovelace, your points on thought-provoking issues within Black families are compelling. The process of dehumanization of Blacks can be traced back to ancient times, particularly evident in the treatment of women and the prevalence of broken family structures still exists in society today. My question is, do you think that is why the women were not named during the Jephthah era?
Thank you, Terry, for your question. In regards to biblical texts, women are named or unnamed depending on their importance to a particular male story in the Bible. And so Sarah and Hagar are named because it was important, especially for Sarah and Hagar, really, but for Sarah to carry on her legacy as the mother in Israel, or the mother of Israel as a nation, and Hagar as the mother of Ishmael, who also God gave a nation to. So that is why they're named. Jephthah's mother is not named because it's irrelevant to the writers for the story, for carrying on the story. As I said at the beginning, she's there to introduce him and to set up his treatment and his story, but her name is irrelevant.
All right.
And the reason why I asked that is because you think about who the mother was, and because of the nature of her being a prostitute. And the father, a lot of times we don't realize men step out on their marriage. And when they step out on the marriage, it's not always to someone of value. And it devalues that person if they knew the truth about the individual being a male. And so sometimes politicians hold positions and they are doing the same thing that has been done in the biblical days, but it devalues the women. They dehumanize the women because of the professions that they may be in, but they never go after or dehumanize the males. And so I can see where where it begins with that. Women are always on that chopping block, but never men brought to the forefront when they're doing something wrong.
Well, yes, in terms of especially contemporary society, that is very true. I would add that in Jephthah's story, one, because while it was frowned upon, prostitution wasn't illegal. And neither was Polygon, even though he's not married to her. Having sexual relations with someone who was not his wife, as long as she was not another man's wife, or with someone who's a prostitute, again, frowned upon, but not illegal. And so in that regards, he's not condemned for it. The father is not condemned for it. He does get away with it, to your point.
Thank you. There are two more questions in the chat. I'm not sure if we're going to have enough time to answer all of them. The first one is, what role does intersectionality play in family dynamics? Then the second one is, I believe the worst thing we can do as African Americans is to derive at the notion that it is man versus woman. To comment. And is there another question? Can a local local congregation serve as a intergenerational training ground in which older adult generations transfer parenting skills to younger parents? Read Dr. Love's question.
So I'm going to be short with Weber and just say yes. And then in terms of gender roles, in terms of what role does intersectionality play in family dynamics, it would be given. So I would look at all things being equal. Is someone treated differently because they have both, I'll say, are both female and Black within the household, or gay and Black in the household? How does that intersection of those two identities function to treat that person differently, or to discriminate against or oppress that person on that double identity differently than they might be treated if they were just male or female, or heterosexual or homosexual?
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Lovelace, for your time with us doing this lecture series. We are blessed by your presence, and thank you so much for the wonderful 2 lectures that you have shared with us over these past 2 days. At this time, I'm going to ask the mic be open up for Dr. Lattimore, our president, to make final comments before we close.
While he's doing that, I'm trying to quickly find, I found it. I wanted to explain why the thugs, we don't give birth to thugs.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to go first, or?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So this is where it came from. A study of Black mothers in New York City and Westchester County, New York, found that these women were concerned about their son's well-being. They were emotionally fatigued at having to worry about their son's safety in the presence of law enforcement, and expressed feelings of guilt for making choices that were not in their son's best interest. But most of all, the study found that these mothers loved their sons and were proud of them. In the words of one mother, we don't give birth to thugs, we give birth to children.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lovelace, and thank you, Dr. Howell, for your good facilitation. Dr. Lovelace, we thank you for sharing insightfully a number of themes of what I consider transpersonal liberation. And in the we think that what you've shared rings true to the spirit of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. And we believe that your many connections to intersectionality and scholarly insights have been very helpful to us. So we extend blessings to you as you journey as a scholar and a pioneer in this work. And you will be receiving a couple of things from us. One would be very tangible. The other is more symbolic. It is a cloth that we share with our speakers, and I have said that the purpose of that cloth is to, as you do your work, as you shed tears, wipe them. As you sweat, wipe them, and even as you laugh and use that cloth to remember your time with us. So God bless you on your journey for a great and thoughtful, evocative lecture.
Thank you again. This was such an honor to be invited. This was actually my second invitation or nomination, and I'm so delighted to have been chosen for this year.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, Dr. Lovelace. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance today. May God bless you for the rest of this weekend and in the days ahead. Again, God bless.
Peace.